The cold wind bit at my face as I hurried down the street, my hands stuffed deep into the pockets of my worn coat. It had been one of those long, exhausting days at work, and all I wanted was to get home. Deadlines were piling up, my boss was on my back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was falling behind. Head down, I moved quickly, eager to leave the day behind. That's when I saw him. A man was standing at the edge of the curb, a little too close to the street. Cars were rushing by in both directions, and something about the way he swayed made my stomach drop. It was as if he didn't see the danger in front of him. I didn't have time to think. I just reacted. "Hey, watch out!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the noise of traffic. His foot slipped from the curb, and in that instant I lunged forward. My hand grabbed his arm just as he began to fall. I yanked him back hard, the force, sending both of us stumbling onto the sidewalk, but safe. For a moment, neither of us moved. He was breathing heavily, eyes wide in shock. "I didn't see it," he mumbled, still dazed. We stood there, catching our breath, his face pale as he realized how close he had come. I could feel my heart pounding, the adrenaline rushing through me. I owe you," he stammered, his voice shaky, but before I could respond, I glanced at my watch. I was late, again. My boss had made it clear this was my last chance to be on time. Without another word, I bolted, leaving the man behind. I didn't even know his name. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of dread hanging over me. I had rushed in the night before, barely making it home, but sleep didn't come easily. All I could think about was the man I'd saved, and how my boss's threat of one more late day was echoing in my mind as I walked into the office. Something felt off. Colleagues avoided eye contact, and the usual hum of morning chatter was missing. I made my way to my desk, but before I could even sit down, my manager's voice cut through the air. "Claire, can I see you in my office?" My stomach sank. The walk to her office felt like it took an eternity, and when I sat down in front of her desk, I knew what was coming. "Claire," she started, her tone icy and formal, "I warned you about your lateness. You were late again yesterday, and unfortunately, we can't keep overlooking it. I'm sorry, but we have to let you go," I tried to explain. I told her about the man, the bus, and how I had saved him from disaster, but it sounded like an excuse, even as the words left my mouth. She listened, but her expression didn't soften. The decision had already been made. Within minutes, I was out of the office with my termination letter in hand, my desk, packed up in a cardboard box. Just like that, I was unemployed. As I stood in the cold, outside the office building, the reality of it all sank in. I had lost my job, and for what? For being late, because I saved someone's life. It didn't feel fair, but life rarely is. Weeks passed, and life became a blur of job applications, rejection emails, and mounting bills. Unemployment weighed on me heavier each day, and the longer it went on, the more hopeless it all seemed. My savings were dwindling fast, and despite my best efforts, no new opportunities came my way. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop scanning yet another job board, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, hesitant. I answered. "Hello, is this Claire Williams?" The voice asked, formal yet polite. "Yes, this is she," I replied cautiously, not recognizing the voice. "My name is Mr. Ortega," he continued. "I believe we met a few weeks ago, though perhaps you may not remember me. I was the man you saved that night from the bus." My heart skipped a beat. The man I had pulled from the street? How could I forget? "I've been trying to find you ever since that night," he said, his tone softening. "I never got to thank you properly. You saved my life." I didn't know what to say. I had left so abruptly that evening, and after everything that had happened at work the next day, it felt like that moment belonged to a different life. "Mr. Ortega, you don't have to," I began, but he cut me off gently. "No, I do, you see. I've learned something quite troubling. You were fired because of that night, weren't you?" I froze, my mind racing. How could he know that? "I did some digging," he admitted, his voice filled with concern. "When I found out, I felt responsible. I can't undo what happened, but I would like to make it right. I was silent, barely able to process his words. "Please, let me meet with you," he said. "There's something I want to offer you." A few days later, I met Mr. Ortega at a small cafe downtown. When I walked in, I recognized him instantly. He stood up, offering a warm smile, looking much healthier and more composed than the last time I'd seen him. He extended his hand, and I shook it, still unsure of where this meeting would lead. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said as we both sat down. His eyes held a gratitude that made me feel uneasy, as though I wasn't worthy of it. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," I replied, still unsure of what he wanted from me. "No, Claire, I did," he said, leaning forward. "What you did for me. You saved my life, and I never properly thanked you, but that's not the only reason I'm here." He took a deep breath before continuing. "You see, I found out that you lost. Your job because of that night, it didn't sit right with me, especially after everything that happened." I was still in shock that he had gone through the trouble of finding out what had happened to me at work, but what he said next left me speechless. "I'd like to offer you a new opportunity," he said, carefully choosing his words. "I'm not just an ordinary man, Claire. I run a company, Ortega Enterprises, and I could use someone like you, someone with integrity, someone who doesn't hesitate to do the right thing, no matter the cost. I'd like to offer you a position with my company." For a moment, I just stared at him, not sure if I had heard him right. He was offering me a job after everything that had happened. "I don't know what to say," I finally managed, my voice shaky. "Why me?" Mr. Ortega smiled softly. "Because I've seen something in you that most people miss. You didn't think twice before." Helping a stranger? And that's the kind of person I want by my side. This is more than just about business, Claire. It's about building something that matters. His words hung in the air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just any job offer. This was a chance at something bigger, something meaningful. I left the cafe that day feeling a mixture of emotions. Gratitude, excitement, but also doubt. Could I really accept such an offer? A part of me felt like this was too good to be true, like I didn't deserve this opportunity that had fallen into my lap. I spent the next few days thinking over everything Mr. Ortega had said. The company he owned, Ortega Enterprises, was well known in the city. It had a reputation for innovation and treating employees with respect, something I hadn't experienced at my old job. But more than that, Mr. Ortega saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself: integrity, courage, a willingness to act even when things seemed impossible. A week later, I stood in front of the glass doors of Ortega Enterprises, feeling a nervous energy coursing through me. Mr. Ortega had arranged a meeting with his team, and today was the day I would decide if I was ready to take the leap. Inside, I was greeted warmly by a receptionist who led me to a sleek conference room on the top floor. Mr. Ortega was already there, along with several members of his leadership team. The atmosphere was professional but welcoming. "Claire, I'm glad you came," Mr. Ortega said with a smile as he motioned for me to sit down. Over the next hour, they explained the position they had in mind for me, a role that would allow me to work on strategic projects, help manage teams, and bring fresh ideas to the table. It was a far cry from the monotonous, underappreciated work had done before, and yet, despite the incredible offer, doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too fast, too sudden. Was I really qualified for this? Was I ready? Mr. Ortega seemed to sense my hesitation. After the meeting, he pulled me aside. "I know this is a big step," he said gently, "but I wouldn't have offered it to you if I didn't believe you were capable. Trust me, Claire. You're more than ready. For this?" His words hit me in a way that nothing else had. For so long I had been trapped in a cycle of self-doubt, feeling like I wasn't enough. But in that moment, something shifted. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. The first few weeks at Ortega Enterprises were a whirlwind. The role was challenging, no doubt about it. I was thrown into meetings with department heads, involved in decision-making processes that I never would have imagined being part of. The stakes were high and the pressure was constant, but for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I felt like my work mattered. Mr. Ortega, true to his word, was there to support me. He wasn't just a CEO who sat behind a desk, disconnected from the daily grind. He was hands-on, constantly checking in, providing guidance when I needed it, and pushing me to step outside my comfort zone. He believed in me in a way that no one else had, and that belief slowly began to change how I saw myself. But with new opportunities came new challenges. Some of the senior staff weren't too pleased to see me rise so quickly in the company. I overheard whispers in the hallways, felt the cold stares during meetings. I was the outsider, the one who had been brought in suddenly by the CEO himself. The tension was palpable, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were right. Had I been given too much, too soon? One afternoon, after a particularly tough meeting where my ideas were met with skepticism, I found myself standing by the window in my office, watching the city below. Doubt crept in again, the familiar voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong here. A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. "Mister," Ortega stepped in, his expression serious but calm. "You're doing great, Claire," he said, as if reading my mind. "I know this isn't easy, but nothing worth having ever is," I sighed, frustrated. "It just feels like I'm always one step away from failing." He smiled, crossing the room to stand beside me. "That's the fear talking. Everyone in this company started where you are, feeling unsure, feeling out of place, but you're here because you earned it, and believe me, you're not alone in this." His words gave me a sense of calm. He had been through this before. He understood, and as much as I still had my doubts, I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I had to silence that inner voice of fear. "Thank you," I said quietly, grateful for his reassurance. "I'll keep pushing." As the weeks passed, I began to find my footing. The initial doubt I had felt slowly started to fade as I proved myself day by day. I worked long hours, pouring my energy into each project. Late nights in the office became my new normal, and although it was exhausting, there was something deeply fulfilling about it. For the first time in my career, I was doing work that made me feel like I was truly contributing to something bigger. But the challenges didn't stop. One particular project had become my responsibility, an ambitious initiative to modernize the company's logistics system. It was a massive undertaking, one that had already been attempted and failed several times. The senior team members were skeptical that I could pull it off, and I knew that their eyes were on me, waiting for me to slip up. Still, I pushed forward, determined to prove them wrong. I spent hours poring over reports, analyzing every detail, and working closely with the tech team to find innovative solutions. Despite the pressure, I felt a growing sense of confidence. Each small victory, whether it was solving a logistical problem or streamlining a process, gave me the momentum to keep going. Then, just when things seemed to be falling into place, disaster struck. A key part of the system crashed during a crucial phase of the implementation, halting the entire project. It was a massive setback, and I could feel the weight of the failure bearing down on me. That old doubt came rushing back, stronger than ever. What if they were right? What if I wasn't capable of doing this? I spent a sleepless night at the office trying to salvage the project. By morning, I was exhausted, staring at the screen with blurry eyes, feeling like I had let everyone down. The phone on my desk rang. It was Mr. Ortega. "I heard about the crash," he said. "Meet me in my office." I dragged myself down the hall, dreading the conversation. When I stepped into his office, he was sitting behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Claire," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Setbacks happen. This is part of the process. The question is, What are you going to do about it? I blinked, surprised. I had expected anger or disappointment, but instead, there was a challenge in his eyes. He wasn't going to let me wallow in failure. "We'll fix it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll fix it." He nodded. "Good. I trust you to handle it." That trust lit a fire in me. I gathered the team, reorganized our approach, and after days of relentless work, we found a solution. The system was back online, stronger than before, and the project moved forward. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a hard-earned one, and more importantly, it was proof that I could rise above the doubt. No matter how difficult the challenges became, after the project's success, everything began to change. The skepticism from the senior team started to fade, replaced by respect. I wasn't just the outsider who had been given an opportunity by the CEO anymore. I had earned my place, the logistics overhaul became a benchmark for future projects, and my reputation in the company began to grow. More responsibilities came my way, but this time I felt ready for them. Each new challenge was met with the confidence I had struggled so long to find. I wasn't the same person who had walked through the doors of Ortega Enterprises, unsure of whether I deserved to be there. I had proven to myself that I did. Mr. Ortega continued to mentor me, but more and more he stepped back, allowing me to take the lead. He trusted my judgment, and that trust became the foundation of my growing success. Our working relationship deepened. He valued my insights, and I admired his ability to guide without controlling. But it wasn't just about work. Over time, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, losing my old job had felt like a failure at the time, but now I saw it for what it really was, an opportunity to start fresh. If I hadn't been late that night, if I hadn't saved Mr. Ortega, I never would have found this new path. Life has a way of pushing you in the right direction, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. One day, after another successful project presentation, Mr. Ortega called me into his office. I could sense something important was about to happen by the tone of his voice. "Claire," he said as I sat down, "I've watched you grow from the moment you started here. You've exceeded every expectation, and you've earned the respect of everyone in this company, including me." I felt a surge of pride as he spoke, but what he said next left me speechless. "I've decided to step back from the day-to-day operations of the company," he continued, "and I want you to take over as Chief Operating Officer." My heart stopped. "Who? Me?" I hadn't seen this coming at all. I sat there stunned, trying to wrap my head around the enormity of what he was offering. "You've earned this, Claire," he said, as if reading my mind. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't know you were ready." For a moment, I was silent, overwhelmed by the weight of the decision. Then, as I looked across the desk at Mr. Ortega, I realized something. This wasn't just about my career, it was about believing in myself the way he had believed in me from the very beginning. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." Becoming the Chief Operating Officer of Ortega Enterprises was both exhilarating and overwhelming. It felt like stepping into an entirely new world, one filled with even more responsibilities, but also with the potential to shape the company in ways I had only dreamed of. The role required me to make tough decisions, lead multiple departments, and constantly think about the bigger picture. It was a challenge unlike any I had faced before, but I embraced it fully. In those first few months, I leaned heavily on the skills I had developed over the years: resilience, quick thinking, and most importantly, the ability to learn from my mistakes. Every decision I made was scrutinized by the board, by the senior team, and by the employees. The pressure was immense, but instead of buckling under it, I thrived. Each challenge became an opportunity to prove myself, to the company, and to myself. Mr. Ortega had transitioned into a more advisory role, stepping back from the day-to-day operations. But he was always there when I needed guidance. He would occasionally check in, offering advice when necessary. But he made it clear that this was my show now, and I was determined to run it well. As I settled into the role, I found myself transforming. I wasn't the same person who had once doubted every decision, who had feared taking risks. I was becoming someone who could lead, someone who could inspire confidence in others. The weight of the position wasn't easy, but it was a weight I was now proud to carry. One evening, after a particularly long day, I stayed late at the office reflecting on how far I had come. The city lights outside my window flickered like stars, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of the journey I had taken, proud of the person I had become. As I sat there, the memory of the night I had saved Mr. Ortega came flooding back. It was strange to think how one split-second decision had changed the entire course of my life. What if I hadn't acted? What if I hadn't been there? The thought made me realize just how interconnected everything in life is. Small moments lead to big changes, and sometimes the most unexpected paths turn out to be the most rewarding. As the months passed, I fully embraced my role as Chief Operating Officer. The company was thriving, and so was I. The doubts that had once haunted me were now distant memories, replaced by a quiet confidence that had been hard-earned. I had become a leader, not only in title, but in spirit. The day came when Mr. Ortega officially announced his retirement from the company. It was a bittersweet moment. He had been a mentor, a guide, and a friend throughout this journey. And though I knew I was ready to continue leading, his absence left a void. The staff gathered to celebrate his incredible legacy, and I stood beside him, feeling the weight of what we had built together. After the celebrations, Mr. Ortega pulled me aside. "Claire, I want you to know that I couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've taken this company to new heights, and I know it will continue to thrive under your leadership." I smiled, grateful for his words. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." He shook his head. "No, Claire, you had it in you all along. All I did was give you the opportunity to see it." His words struck a chord deep within me. It was true. Everything I had accomplished had been a result of my own resilience, my own courage to take the leap when it mattered most. I realized then that this journey hadn't just been about my career. It had been about finding myself, about understanding that sometimes the biggest obstacles we face are the ones within us. As Mr. Ortega left the company, I stood at the helm, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but I no longer feared it. Instead, I embraced it, knowing that whatever came next, I had the strength to face it. Looking back, it was incredible to think how much had changed since that night. What had begun as a simple act of saving a stranger's life had evolved into a life-changing journey of self-discovery, growth, and purpose. The irony wasn't lost on me. Losing my job had been the catalyst for finding my true calling. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and sometimes the very things we think will break us turn out to be the making of us. And as I stood in my office, overlooking the city, I knew one thing for sure: I was exactly where I was meant to be. Final reflection. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the greatest transformations. Saving a man's life and losing my job might have seemed like the end, but it was only the beginning. That single, selfless act led me on a path I could never have imagined, and in the process, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had.